Dude, he grunted, helping me hoist a massive steel counterweight into the hidden anchor box. Are you absolutely sure this thing isn't going to suddenly catapult you over the fence like a medieval siege engine? Trust my math, I said, tightening a bolt. Mostly. It's all about leverage and counterbalance, and a healthy dose of that'll show her. Okay, picture this. Saturday afternoon. Sun high, breeze gentle, birds doing their cheerful little chirping thing. Me? I was achieving nirvana. Horizontal nirvana, to be precise, suspended between two ancient, obliging oak trees in my backyard, gently swaying in my beloved hammock. Worn blue canvas, slightly frayed at the edges, molded perfectly over years of dedicated lounging. A half-finished paperback lay on my chest. A condensation-beaded glass of iced tea sat precariously on the grass nearby. Ah, yes, I murmured to a passing squirrel. This is it, the apex predator of relaxation. Forget fancy spas, forget silent retreats. Give me dappled sunlight, the scent of cut grass from my neighbor's yard, admittedly. Mine was flirting with meadow chic, and the gentle creak of hammock ropes. This was my sanctuary. My escape pod from TPS reports, client demands, and the general chaos of being a moderately functional adult. Utter bliss. Or it was, until the first sonic intrusion. Not a car alarm, not a plane overhead. Worse. The distinct, aggressive snip, snip, snip of pruning shears wielded with righteous fury, emanating from just over the 6-foot cedar fence separating my slice of suburban paradise from that of Karen, she who must critique. I tried to tune it out, focused on my breathing, admired a particularly fluffy cloud, but the snipping was relentless, punctuated by loud, pointed sighs that seemed scientifically calibrated to carry over wooden barriers. Then came the muttering, addressed to her terrified-looking poodle, Fifi, but clearly intended for my ears. Some people just let things go, Fifi, she declared, snipping a perfectly healthy rosebush blossom with unnecessary violence. No pride in their property, just lounging, all day long, like layabouts. Snip, snip, sigh. Okay, deep breath, Sam. Ignore her. You are an island of tranquility. You are one with the hammock. Zen master of the backyard nap. My zen was shattered moments later by a shadow falling over me. I opened one eye. Karen stood at the fence line, peering over, her expression a mixture of disapproval and forensic curiosity. Fifi yapped encouragingly at her ankles. "Samuel!" she barked, making me nearly spill my potential inner peace. "I need to talk to you about this situation." She gestured vaguely, not at me, but at the hammock itself. I sighed, swinging my legs over the side and sitting up. The blissful suspension vanished, replaced by the familiar tension of an impending Karen encounter. "Karen? Problem? Everything okay?" "No, Samuel, it is not okay." Her voice quivered with indignation. This hammock." She pointed a trembling finger at the gently swaying canvas. "So, it's just hanging around all day, right here." I blinked, once, twice. Tried to process the accusation. "Well, yeah," I said slowly, reasonably. That's kind of what hammocks do, they hang." "It's loitering," she declared, planting her hands on her hips. "Right here, near my property line. It's highly irregular. It just sits there." Loitering? My hammock? An inanimate object made of canvas and rope? Was she serious? "Karen," I began, trying to keep the bewilderment out of my voice, "are you saying the hammock is loitering? Like it should have a job? Or maybe move along if it doesn't intend to make a purchase?" Her eyes narrowed into suspicious slits. "Don't be facetious, Samuel. It contributes to an atmosphere of idleness. And frankly, I don't appreciate having to look at it just dangling there whenever I'm trying to enjoy my prize-winning petunias." "It's on my side of the fence, Karen," I pointed out, still reeling from the loitering charge. "Tied to my trees." "It's visible," she snapped. "And it needs to move along. This is a respectable neighborhood." She sniffed, gave the hammock one last withering glare, and marched back towards her house, Fifi yapping triumphantly in her wake. I just sat there, swinging slightly, my brain trying to file loitering hammock under a relevant category. It couldn't. The absurdity was staggering. I shook my head, lay back down, and tried to recapture my zen, but the peace was gone, replaced by a nagging annoyance and a profound sense of bafflement. I figured that would be the end of it. Karen being Karen, right? Wrong. So very wrong. 2 days later, an email landed in my inbox. Not from Karen directly, oh no. This was from the Lakewood Estates Architectural Review and Community Harmony Committee, a grandiose title for what was essentially Karen and 2 other bewildered retirees she bullied into agreeing with her. Subject: formal complaint regarding stationary fabric structure, Hammock, exhibiting loitering behavior. I read it aloud to my partner, Chloe, that evening. "Dear Mr. Henderson," it began, "we have received a formal complaint, corroborated by photographic evidence. See attached, Exhibit A, regarding a hammock structure located on your property line which appears to remain stationary for extended periods, potentially constituting a visual nuisance and exhibiting behavior consistent with loitering under." I swear this is what it says. Under a broad interpretation of Community Guideline 17B, prohibiting unsightly or unattended structures persistently occupying visible space. I clicked on Exhibit A. It was a blurry photo, clearly taken by Karen leaning over the fence, showing my hammock, just hanging there, motionless, as hammocks tend to do when unoccupied. Chloe peered at the screen, then burst out laughing. "She actually reported your hammock for loitering? And provided photographic proof of it not moving? Sam, that's performance art levels of crazy!" "It's not funny," I protested, though a reluctant smile tugged at my lips. "They're demanding remedial action within 10 days. What remedial action can I take? Teach the hammock to pace? Get it a tiny little security guard uniform? Maybe just take it down when you're not using it?" Chloe suggested pragmatically. "No!" I slammed my fist on the table, gently, its particle board. "It's the principle. My hammock has the right to hang peacefully. It's not loitering, it's hammockitating." The HOA, perhaps sensing the sheer ridiculousness of the complaint, but pressured by Karen's persistence, sent Gary from the committee over for an informal site assessment. Gary looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth, possibly wrestling a badger. He stood on my lawn, looked at the hammock, looked towards Karen's house where she was unsubtly watching from behind her curtains, and sighed heavily. "So," Gary began, shuffling his feet, "she says it's, loitering?" "That's the official terminology, Gary, yes," I confirmed gravely. Gary squinted at the hammock. It swayed gently. "Right," he said slowly. "Well, it's a hammock, tied to your trees, on your property." He looked back at me, lowering his voice. "Honestly, Sam, between you and me, she complained last month that the squirrels were staring disrespectfully at her bird feeder. I'm not seeing a violation here." He scribbled something on his notepad, probably, "Subject appears sane, complainant questionable," and beat a hasty retreat. That should have been the end of it. But Karen, denied official recourse, escalated to guerrilla tactics. One morning, I found the hammock mysteriously soaked, despite no rain overnight. Karen's sprinkler system, conveniently located near the fence, seemed to have developed a sudden, inexplicable high-arc trajectory aimed directly at my relaxation station. A few days later, A pile of damp, rotting leaves appeared directly underneath it, as if deliberately raked there. "She's targeting the hammock," I fumed to Chloe. "This is harassment! Textile harassment!" "Okay, Sun Tzu," Chloe said, handing me a towel to dry the afflicted canvas. "What's your art of war strategy now?" "Research," I declared. Fueled by spite and coffee, I dove into the thrilling world of municipal codes, property line bylaws, and, most importantly, airspace rights. Pages and pages of legalese about setbacks, easements, and fence heights. And then I found it, a little gray area. While structures on the property line were heavily regulated, and permanent structures extending over it were generally forbidden, the rules about temporary or non-permanent things occupying the airspace above a neighbor's yard, below navigable FAA limits, so no blimps, were surprisingly vague, especially if nothing actually touched their property. My mind started racing. Airspace. Above her yard. Visible, but untouchable. So, I explained my findings to Chloe later, pacing the living room. Technically, as long as nothing physically rests on her side of the fence or ground, the air directly above her prize-winning petunias, say 8 feet up, is kinda unregulated territory. Chloe looked at me suspiciously. "Why are you suddenly an expert on low-altitude airspace law, Sam? Please tell me you're not planning to launch the hammock into orbit with a catapult." No, I waved a dismissive hand, though the catapult idea had a certain appeal. Something much more elegant, much more elevated. The final push came the following weekend. I was trying once again to find peace in my hammock when Karen positioned 3 large, hideously discordant wind chimes directly on her side of the fence, creating a cacophony that could shatter glass and fray nerves. Clang-dong tinkle-bonk. It was auditory torture. That did it. She didn't want to see the hammock loitering on my side? Fine. She wanted it gone? Fine. But she was going to see something. "She hates me relaxing," I muttered, retreating indoors, the clanging echoing in my ears. "Hates the hammock being there. Fine, she won't see it hanging. She'll see it floating, right over her stupid clanging wind chimes." The vision solidified. Not magnets, not drones. Too complex, too prone to failure, or FAA complaints. No, this called for solid engineering disguised as baffling magic. A platform, cantilevered, anchored securely, invisibly on my side, extending out, seemingly suspended in mid-air, right over her precious petunia patch. An aerial relaxation station, a monument to spite, engineered to perfection. "Okay," I announced to Chloe that night, pulling out graph paper and a calculator. "Project Aerial Relaxation Station is a go." Chloe just poured herself a large glass of wine. "Just try not to accidentally cantilever yourself into her swimming pool, okay?" The next few weeks were a whirlwind of clandestine activity. My garage, usually reserved for storing lawn equipment and forgotten hobbies, transformed into a fabrication workshop. Designing the cantilever system was the key challenge. It needed to support my weight, plus a safety margin, resist wind shear, and be perfectly balanced, all while appearing effortlessly suspended. I spent hours running calculations, sketching designs, arguing with physics simulations on my laptop. Sourcing materials was its own adventure. I needed high-strength, lightweight aluminum I-beams, marine-grade composite decking for the platform, and seriously heavy-duty mounting hardware. Explaining my needs at the industrial metal supplier raised eyebrows. "Building a deck?" the grizzled foreman asked skeptically, looking at my request for aircraft-grade aluminum. "Something like that," I mumbled. "More of an elevated observation platform for competitive bird watching. Very large, heavy birds." He just grunted and took my order. The build itself was conducted under cloak of darkness and weekend afternoons when Karen was usually out playing bridge or terrorizing the local garden center. There was much sawing, drilling, and muttered cursing. Anchoring the main support beam on my side required digging a hole deep enough to hide Jimmy Hoffa and pouring an obscene amount of concrete, all disguised later by a large, innocent-looking planter box filled with suspiciously sturdy bamboo. My buddy Dave, the chair-cementing veteran, came over to help with the heavy lifting. "Dude," he grunted, helping me hoist a massive steel counterweight into the hidden anchor box. "Are you absolutely sure this thing isn't going to suddenly catapult you over the fence like a medieval siege engine?" "Trust my math," I said, tightening a bolt. "Mostly, it's all about leverage and counterbalance, and a healthy dose of that'll show her." The trickiest part was the final measurement. I needed the platform to clear the top of the 6-foot fence by about 18 inches, but extend a good 5 feet over Karen's side, far enough to be undeniably over her yard, right above her meticulously planted border of prize-winning begonias, not petunias. I'd misidentified them earlier. This involved a tense late-night operation with a laser level, a long pole with a marker, and me praying Karen or Fifi didn't choose that exact moment for a midnight potty break. Finally, after weeks of secret toil, it was ready. A sleek, minimalist platform, about 4 feet by 7 feet, made of dark composite decking, attached to a sturdy but surprisingly thin-looking cantilevered aluminum beam painted flat black to minimize its visibility. From the right angle, especially from Karen's side, it should look almost unsupported. Floating. Installation day. A quiet Tuesday morning. Dave came over early for moral support and plausible deniability. We carefully bolted the main beam to the now cured concrete anchor, slid the counterweights into place, and then, the moment of truth, attached the platform arm. We extended it slowly, smoothly, out over the fence line. It cleared the top rail with inches to spare. Perfect. It sat there, solid, stable, and utterly surreal. An impossible object hanging in the suburban air. "Okay," Dave breathed, stepping back. "I gotta admit, that's impressive and completely nuts." "Mission accomplished," I grinned, grabbing a cushion, my book, and a fresh glass of iced tea. "Phase 2 begins now." I placed a small, discreet aluminum stepladder on my side near the anchor box, climbed up, and settled onto the platform. The view was different, elevated. I could see right into Karen's perfectly ordered garden, and more importantly, she could see me. I didn't have to wait long. Around 10 a.m., Karen emerged, armed with a trowel and a look of grim determination, ready to wage war on weeds. She knelt down by her begonias, her back to the fence. She worked for a few minutes, then straightened up to admire her handiwork. Her gaze drifted upwards, and stopped. Her eyes went wide. Her jaw dropped. The trowel clattered to the flagstones. She blinked rapidly, rubbed her eyes, looked again. I gave her a little wave. "Samuel!" The shriek could have curdled concrete. Fifi, startled, erupted into frantic yapping from inside her house. "What is that? What in God's name are you doing up there?" I lowered my book, peering down calmly over the edge of the platform. "Oh, morning, Karen," I called pleasantly. "Just enjoying the breeze. Lovely view of your begonias from up here. Really thriving this year." "Get down from there!" she screeched, pointing a shaking finger. "Get that thing out of my yard, out of my airspace." "My aerial relaxation station?" I inquired innocently. "It's quite secure, I assure you. State-of-the-art cantilever engineering. And technically," I added, savoring the words, "it's not actually touching your property." "It's hovering," she shrieked, her voice cracking. It's loitering menacingly in my sky." "Now, Karen," I tutted gently, "platforms can't loiter. We've been over this with the hammock, remember? I picked up my book and resumed reading, or at least pretended to, while she continued to sputter and rage below. Predictably, the calls went out. First, the police. A young officer arrived, looking deeply skeptical. He listened patiently to Karen's frantic explanation of the hovering menace and my sky invasion. He looked up at me, lounging comfortably. He consulted his notepad. "Sir," he called up to me, trying to maintain a professional tone. "Your neighbor reports a floating bed?" "Cantilevered aerial relaxation platform, officer," I corrected politely. "Structurally sound, fully anchored on my property." He turned back to Karen. "Ma'am," he said with world-weary patience, "is the, platform, or the gentleman, actually touching your property?" "No!" Karen practically vibrated with fury. "It's invading my sky!" The officer sighed, a sound that echoed the accumulated weariness of dealing with bizarre suburban disputes. "Yeah," he said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "We don't really have a code for sky invasion below 50 feet, ma'am. As long as it's anchored on his property and doesn't look like it's about to fall." He shrugged helplessly. "Not really a police matter." He tipped his hat and made a hasty retreat before she could elaborate on the menacing nature of my relaxation. Code enforcement was next, same result. They measured the fence height, measured the setback of the anchor point on my side, scratched their heads, found no specific violation in their binders covering cantilevered structures extending over property lines unless they were attached to the main house or below a certain clearance, which this wasn't. They mumbled something about novel architectural features and left, looking confused. The HOA was similarly flummoxed. Karen demanded action, but what could they do? There was no bylaw against hovering, or appearing to hover. They couldn't fine me for violating airspace regulations they didn't have. My aerial relaxation station existed in a perfect storm of legal gray areas and sheer, unmitigated weirdness. Karen was defeated. Utterly, gloriously defeated by applied mechanics and weaponized leisure. And so, the floating bed stayed. It became a fixture, a legend. People would drive by slowly, pointing. Gary from the HOA committee gave me a discreet thumbs up when he saw me up there. Dave brought over beers, and we admired it from the ground. Chloe just shook her head but kept supplying me with iced tea. Now, most sunny afternoons, you can find me up there. Gently swaying, not in a hammock, but on my platform. Book in hand, drink nearby, enjoying the breeze. Karen still glares from her window sometimes, or pretends I don't exist when she's gardening below, surrounded by her wind chimes, which, strangely, I can barely hear from my elevated perch. Just yesterday, Chloe brought me up a plate of muffins. "Temporal distortion alert?" she asked, grinning. "Nah," I said, taking one. "Just enjoying the view, zero loitering." I gave a little wave down towards Karen's begonias. She didn't wave back. Perfect.